Hi, I'm Fumi OK and you're in the stream. Today, the Sochi Olympics, we look at whether the games should be just games or a platform for political protest. We're going for gold in our conversation today. Is the community up to it? Malika Bilal, digital producer?
They're always up to it.
Very good.
You know, my favorite moment, and before a show starts, is when there's dynamic conversation, even before we have begun to roll.
And that's what happened. For the pre-show,
exactly.
Right?
That's what happened today. So we asked, should politics be set aside for the Sochi Olympics? And just a few minutes ago, Omar tweeted in, that's the whole point of sporting events. It transcends politics. But he got a response. Part of this dynamic conversation. Dandelion writes in, no, the Olympic Games are kind of the epitome of political. Ignoring social ills to reward running, she says, is super negligent. And I want to hear what you at home think as well. So add your voice to this conversation using hashtag AJStream.
Now this really is your conversation, so you can jump in anytime. One of the many ways you can do that is go to stream.aljazeera.com/about, and there you can find all of the ways that you can keep in touch with us. Malika gave you our Twitter details. There's Facebook, there's Google+, there's YouTube, there's Reddit, there's Pinterest, and if you miss any of the shows, there's always the podcast, and you too can be in the stream.
My name is Hussein Rashid. I'm a professor of Islamic Studies, and I am in the stream.
So Russia is already breaking records, and the 2014 Winter Olympics is still weeks away. The Sochi Games are the most expensive and one of the most controversial in Olympic history. Restrictions on gays, the press, political activists, and recently 2 deadly bombings have all made the news and brought out protesters. But what has any of this got to do with one of the biggest sporting events in the world? Is it even possible or ethical to sideline politics during the Olympics? To help us talk about this, from New York we have Masha Gessen. She is a Russian gay rights activist and author of the just released Words Will Break Cement, The Passion of Pussy Riot. In Massachusetts we have Caitlin Cahill. She's a US Olympic hockey gold medalist and a member of the US delegation going to Sochi. In our Google Plus hangout from Moscow, Peter Shenashev is a former Olympian and 5-time US national champion in ice dancing, and he's currently coaching Russian skaters for Sochi. And also in New York, we have Jane Buchanan. She's a lead researcher for Human Rights Watch on the Sochi Games. So it's great to have you all here in the stream. I want to start with Masha first of all. Masha, if you had your way, would the Sochi Winter Games be going ahead?
No, I think that if I had my way, Russia never would have gotten the right to hold the Olympics, because the Olympic Charter actually makes it very clear that the country that holds the Olympics has to comply with a number of human rights requirements. The chief among them, and the most obvious, being that there should be no discrimination, that should be equal opportunity for all athletes and spectators, anybody who attends the games. That is clearly not the case in Sochi, and it was clear that it wasn't going to be the case even 7 years ago, when Vladimir Putin personally went to Guatemala City to lobby the International Olympic Committee to give the games to Russia.
So, Peter, you hear that, and you're training skaters. They're literally weeks away. A month today, the games will be on in Sochi. So, how do you respond to Masha saying Russia shouldn't even be having the games? They shouldn't even be taking place there?
Well, I wish Masha could clarify her statement now, because so far she just stated her opinion, but she didn't back up her opinion with the facts. I want to hear that, because I can't respond to that opinion. It's just one person's opinion, and that's about it. So as far as I'm concerned, there's the situation in the Sochi is completely opposite. So,
what do you want to know from Masha, Peter? Ask her. She's here listening.
Well, she stated that there is like so much, I guess, human rights violations. Did I understand you correctly?
You understood me correctly. Russia not only...
Can you name a few in
Absolutely.
Sochi? First of all, number one, I want to ask you, have you been to Sochi?
Yes, I have been to Sochi.
But
actually, I'm talking about the Olympic Charter, which specifies that the country that hosts the Olympics has to guarantee equal human rights and non-discriminatory attitudes toward all who would come to the Olympics. Well, Russia just last year, Russia passed clearly discriminatory laws. I'm not even talking about the extra legal discriminatory practices. I'm talking, Peter. I'm going to say to name them. The law on homosexual propaganda, so-called homosexual propaganda,
which is state.
Can I please finish?
Because it states the propaganda among the underaged children, right? Am I right? Yes.
The law on homosexual propaganda specifies that it is actually a crime to claim social equality of so-called traditional and non-traditional sexual relations. It is the first law in Russia and one of the very, very few laws around the world that actually enshrines second-class citizenship for a particular group of people.
So Peter,
it is discriminatory on the face of it.
So Peter, bringing this back to sport, as you're training athletes who are getting ready for the Olympic Games, how much of this are they aware of the politics swirling around this particular Olympics?
Yeah, let me tell you this much. As an athlete, as a former athlete, as a present coach of the athletes preparing for Sochi, I am not only offended but also disappointed that this kind of statement is going into that Masha is using this momentum and this time.
What do you find offensive? And I'm just going to let our audience know that they're actually watching pictures of you skating from when you were an Olympian, so they understand why we're playing somebody ice skating while you're talking.
Right.
So what is the offence? Why are you offended?
Number one, I when someone accusing not one person but the whole country on violating the human rights, they have to back up the statement with the facts, right?
Okay, and Masha did give you some, but that's why you're offended?
And number two, well, because that's pretty bold offense, I think. And number two, I think let me remind all of us, since we're having this conversation, that Olympic Games historically were stopping the bloodshed and interrupting wars, and to allow anyone at this time to use Olympic Games to propel the platform or social disagreements. I think it's killing the whole idea of the Olympic Games.
All right, so Peter, let me just.
I'd like to jump in here. This is just to talk a little bit about. Peter mentioned the specific facts and specific cases in Sochi. I've been traveling to Sochi repeatedly since 2009 to document human rights abuses specifically linked to the preparations for the Games. So we've documented extensive issues related to forced evictions in Sochi. People moved out to make way for Olympic venues and infrastructure, exploitation of migrant workers and other workers who've been building Olympic venues and infrastructure, those very arenas that the athletes and journalists and spectators will be using and enjoying. And as well, something that's ongoing to this day, harassment and intimidation of activists and journalists who are trying to speak out and criticize the Games, both in Sochi and in other parts of Russia. That includes LGBT activists, people speaking out on behalf of gay rights. So there are plenty of facts that have been disclosed and should be disclosed. It's the ethical thing to do when a country is violating human rights as part of its Olympic preparations. The Olympic Charter talks about human dignity. You can't have an Olympic Games that celebrate human dignity when you have these kind of abuses as part of those preparations.
Well, Jane, you mentioned the ethical thing to do, and then I'm going to read you a tweet from one person who disagrees with you. Jade Tree tweets in, I think these games are being unfairly sabotaged, she says. If someone wants to see the Super Bowl, he uses as an example, it doesn't mean that they necessarily support Guantanamo, but a few people mentioned the charter. El Haji tweets in, the Olympic Charter mandates the IOC follow a very strict criteria in choosing a host city. This duty includes human rights and security concerns, but someone else, Hannah, follows up with that saying, regardless, the Olympics have always been political. So Jane, you mentioned the research that you've done on Sochi, but isn't this something that has come up in the past with other games as well? Is it possible to separate those two things?
Well, look, people who are being abused, if they've been kicked out of their homes without proper compensation to make way for an Olympic venue, or a migrant worker who's been toiling for months on a major ice arena who hasn't been paid, hasn't been fed. Look, those people have a right to speak out. Advocates have a right and a responsibility to advocate on their behalf. If they're not in a position to do so, or they're in a situation where there is not recourse for them from the local authorities or from the judiciary for them, to have these abuses rectified. Of course, we're going to speak out, and those people shouldn't just be sitting silently taking this abuse because they're an Olympic city, just like anywhere else. They have a right to talk about and to try to have their problems solved. So it's simply reasonable and fair. And when the spotlight is on Russia wanted to host these games. It wanted the prestige and the platform of them. Of course the spotlight is going to be on them. People are going to be looking at how these games are being prepared. What are the conditions in which athletes, journalists, spectators, and others are going to Sochi? What is the backstory here? What should we know about it?
See, I'm looking
also, if I can jump in for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure, there have been other countries that are also abusers of human rights that have hosted the Olympics. I don't see how that's in any way an argument in favor of violating the Olympic Charter. In addition, it's a relatively unusual situation to hold the Olympics in a country that is actively in the throes of a severe human rights crackdown, a crackdown on civil society that is unusual even if you compare it to the state of Russia 5 years ago or 7 years ago. There have some people have compared holding the games in Russia now to the games of 1936 that were held in Berlin, and I think that's a very fair comparison.
Let me just bring in Caitlin here. Caitlin, you are actually going to Sochi in a couple of weeks' time, part of the US delegation. I'm actually looking at a picture here of when you were Olympian on my laptop here. So you must have a very specific point of view that it would be really good to hear from you in this conversation. What's your take?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been sort of sitting back and listening, and obviously there are atrocities that occur in Russia and around the world, but I guess as an athlete, and this may seem simplistic to some, my experience as an athlete had absolutely nothing to do with the political culture surrounding the Olympics. I trained my entire life night and day to represent my country on the Olympic scale, and to me it was the crowning achievement of my life as an athlete, and I think that's true for athletes from around the world. And for me, more importantly, the Olympics provided an opportunity for 2 weeks every year for the entire world to stop and put the mirror up to their own faces and perhaps reflect a little bit and perhaps engage in discourse that might elevate conversations, that might change minds, that might change policies. And I think the arguments that I've heard so far are saying about the atrocities that are occurring, well, what better way to magnify the atrocities that are occurring and to expose outside culture to Russia and Russia to the world than to have the Olympic Games there? I mean, there's already been more dialogue in the last year than there has been in the last 10 years about Russian policy. And I would also note that I'm representing a country, and I'm very proud to do so, that has made huge, huge dramatic strides on these issues in the last few years. I mean, the United States hasn't had a clean slate when it comes to LGBT policy. It was, a very short time ago, in fact, this past spring, that marriage equality started to become a reality federally in the United States. So I think that, if I go to Alabama, I'm still a second-class citizen there. I think that,
Do you want
we
to
seem to be
explain why,
pointing a lot
Caitlin?
of
Because
fingers.
we have an international audience here who might not know you as an activist as well as an athlete or a former athlete. So I think you actually have to, within this conversation, actually explain why your point of view is so relevant and perhaps why you're actually even going to Sochi as part of the delegation as well. Very specific reason, and it's important.
I'd be happy to explain it. I mean, one, I was chosen by the president to represent not only the LGBT community, although I'm happy to represent that community because I am openly gay, but I'm going to represent all Americans and the diversity of the American experience. That was the official, White House explanation for putting together the delegation as they did. But I will say that one of the things that I'm proudest of going to Sochi is representing a country that is making changes on these issues. We're not perfect in the United States. I mean, I think a lot of the audience will be following what's going on in Utah with same-sex marriage. we've had same-sex marriage promoted and allowed in many states. DOMA was overturned this past spring by the Windsor case, but this is still an issue that's very much in transition in the United States, and I think that this may be an opportunity for us, even here at home, to continue these discussions, to continue to say what can we be doing better towards universal equality.
Right, interesting take there. Malika?
Yeah, I just want to make it very clear that we're not talking about just the anti-gay laws. The anti-gay laws are in a way the most vivid and most recent example of, again, a wide-ranging crackdown on the entire civil society in Russia, on truly atrocious violations of human rights. So the comparison between the United States, which doesn't have a perfect record on LGBT rights, and Russia, which is a dictatorship that's in the midst of a human rights crackdown, is quite misleading. And I think Jane can speak more to this.
Let me stop you for a moment, because hold on one second.
I want to finish.
You can finish, sure.
Jane can speak more to this, but unfortunately, while there's value to shining a spotlight on a particular country and its track record, what we have seen in the past is that countries that are human rights violators after the Olympics crack down more than they did before the Olympics.
I guess what I would just say is that I completely understand the fact that, speaking from the United States in Boston, Massachusetts, my situation is quite different from someone speaking out in Sochi, Russia. I can't be in prison for living my life, and I'm grateful for that. But the most important reason why I'm on this delegation is to go to Russia representing a country that does allow me to have those rights and does allow me those liberties and is working towards universal human rights. And I think that is the entire point of our delegation, to show that we are moving towards equality, and we're trying and we're doing what we can to try to improve ourselves. And I don't see anything wrong with that kind of representation on the world stage.
So regardless...
That's terrific. I mean, I wish the Olympics weren't happening in Sochi at all, but if they are going to happen, I think this is the best delegation that can possibly go.
Okay, Malika...
Jane, I actually want to bring you back in here because I have a video comment from someone who raises a lot of issues. Have a listen to this.
I don't think it's possible to divorce politics from the Olympics, and if anything, Sochi has shown us that the Games are very much an inherently political event. In addition to corruption and LGBT issues, other serious concerns have been raised by people such as the Circassians, rallying around the fact that the Games are being held in the region in which their 19th century genocide occurred, and from people in the security field who have grave concerns about the proximity of Russia's insurgency in the North Caucasus, which, in addition to the tragic Volgograd bombings last week, has been claiming lives nearly every day for the past decade.
So Jane, he mentions LGBT issues, he mentions the location of the Games, the Circassian issue, he mentions lots of things, but also says it still might warrant a boycott. Would a boycott even work?
Well, look, the issue, I think we want to be clear here that speaking out about human rights, advocating on behalf of people who have suffered human rights abuses, it is not anti-sport, it is not anti-athletes. I love the Olympics, I love sport. We want the athletes to go and have the time of their lives, and for this to be a celebration. It is up to Russia, and it has been up to Russia to allow the Games to be just that. And unfortunately, Russia hasn't done that. It is cracked down. We've heard about the abuses that we've been discussing. It's Russia that's created this atmosphere that has allowed these abuses and this discourse to sort of mar the situation. In terms of a boycott, look, the athletes should go, spectators should go. They should have their celebration. What we ask is that, if leaders are going, international leaders are going to Sochi, that they speak out, that they state publicly their concerns about human rights in Russia, that they don't legitimize Putin and his policies by sitting next to him in the opening ceremonies, and for that type of celebration. They should be much more outspoken if they're going to be going.
This conversation happens every single Olympics. There are always issues, there are always protests. I want to take you back to 1968. Do you remember when there were two black athletes who competed in Mexico and they gave the black power symbol, and it was an image that went around the world, and they used the Olympics to make a political statement? I want you to hear a little bit of an interview that was done shortly after that, and what the interviewer asked them is exactly the same question that we're asking today. So have a listen to this.
Do you think the Olympic Games are the right place to do this kind of thing? That you ought to use this as a kind of world stage?
David, since we are athletes, although I am a teacher, but I'm not a politician, we use this so the whole world could see the poverty of the black man in America.
At the same time, cynics might say that you've got it all. You've got publicity, you've got medals, you've got martyrdom as well. What do you say to that?
I can't eat that, and the kids around my block, they grew up with me, they can't eat it. And the kids that's going to grow up after them, they can't eat publicity, they can't eat gold medals, as Tommy Smith said. All we ask for is equal chance to be a human being.
So that's Tommy Smith and John Carlos, very famous from those Mexico Olympics back in the 1960s. Peter, coming back to you and coming back to the athletes that you're working with your former reputation as an ice dancer, I'm wondering whether you have this incredible power and platform as an actual athlete to show the world what you feel and care about that you're given every 4 years in the Olympics. Maybe you could use it in a positive way rather than just go, hey, no politics, it's the Olympics.
Well, honestly, I'm not politics is not my forte to begin with, and I think, gosh, you put me on the spotlight with the politics, but I'm totally oblivious to politics, as long as
it's all about the skating.
As long as people are happy, and as long as as I mentioned before, if everyone thinks that Olympic Games is the proper tool to bring peace and and common sense in any kind of situation, why don't we put effort to honor that?
So this is
talking
Peter,
to
this is
Masha
a conundrum.
and to Jane. Yeah.
So this is a conundrum because we're wrapping up this main show here, and I'm just thinking, this happens so regularly. It's happening back in the 60s. It happens pretty much every single Olympics. Caitlin, how do we get out of this situation where the Olympics becomes a platform for protest, or is it almost impossible to do that?
I mean, I agree with the viewer that there's no way you're going to divorce the Olympics from politics. That's just how it goes. On the other hand, I don't expect any athlete to make any kind of statement if they don't feel like making a statement. It's up to each athlete, in my opinion. And some people are introverted, some people are extroverted. It's just like one's sexuality. It's just part of your makeup. If you feel strongly that you need to say something, then you can say it. And stand by your convictions. But at the same time, I think that the majority of athletes going to Sochi are going to compete and represent their countries and try to bring honor to their nations. And that's what they're thinking about right now. They're not thinking about protests.
So I'd like to make a point about protests on the part of the...
Because in answer to your question, Tammy, one person says, no, it shouldn't be used as a platform. Sigsone on Twitter says, my stance is that the Games shouldn't be used as a medium for propagating rights. Sports should be distanced from politics. And he gets a direct answer from someone else. Louise says, sporting events are the fuel to competition and capitalism. They don't transcend politics. They support them.
Interesting. So you heard everybody.
And I guess my response to you is that from the athlete's perspective, the athletes aren't necessarily making it about politics. It's an externality. It's what's being imposed on athletes going to the Games. And as an athlete myself, I can tell you 100%, when I was competing in the Olympics, my number one goal was to win and to bring honor to myself and my country. And I think that's the stance of most of the athletes.
Sure. So
Caitlin, I couldn't agree with you more. That's absolutely the role and the right of athletes to go and do that. And, on the flip side, it's Russia's responsibility to ensure that the Games take place in an atmosphere that respects human dignity and non-discrimination. And unfortunately, in this case, the Russian government hasn't done that. But it's absolutely the athletes. The athletes are there to compete and do your absolute best.
All right. So we have some agreement. We have some disagreement. And Peter, I'm going to ask you to take a pause. Just take a moment, because I'm going to take you to the post show at stream.aljazeera.com, where we will continue this conversation about politics in the Olympics, with the upcoming Sochi Olympics just a couple of weeks away. Meanwhile, coming up on the next AJ stream, we head to Malaysia, where hundreds of Bibles have been seized because they contain the word God, or to be precise, the Arabic word for God, Allah. Malay courts have decided only Muslims can use Allah, and that's created a huge debate. We'll be having that big debate tomorrow. Stay with us. The post show's next at stream.aljazeera.com. See you online. Thanks for watching. Hello there, this is the online post show at stream.aljazeera.com. We are discussing whether politics can or should be sidelined for the Olympics. With us in our discussion, Masha Gessen, Caitlin Cahill, Jane Buchanan and Peter Chernyshев. It's great to have you all here. Guests, did you feel how quickly that conversation went? That was 30 minutes just gone. But I know, Peter, at the very end of that main show, you said, I disagree. Explain.
Well, I'm going to say that Russia will prove that they're going to provide the great venues, the great environment for the Olympic Games, for athletes, for all tourists. I've been to Sochi the past year, over the summer, fall, and the late fall 3 times. I've seen all the venues. Everything looks
What's it look like?
amazing shape.
What does it look like? Take us there a bit. Describe it for us.
Well, all right, everything is looking very modern, with palm trees standing around, with the green grass and snow laying on top of the mountains.
There's palm trees and snow?
Yeah,
Okay.
palm trees and snow,
Right.
and it's going to be amazing experience for everyone who's going to come there, and I'm sure that athletes are going to have the full support of the volunteers working there, and they perform to their best ability, and spectators around the world will see great performances.
Malika, I just want to mention that Peter was saying that it's turned from a summer resort into a winter resort, and we actually approached the head of the Olympic Committee in Sochi, and he sent us back some comments. So thank you very much, Dmitry Chernyshев, for doing that. He says that Sochi has been transformed from a regional summer resort into a world-class centre for business and tourism, which will continue to benefit many generations to come. So we did ask him. We asked him about the politics. We asked him about the protests, and he came back, like Peter, with some very positive comments. Malika.
Positive comments, but he also, of course, mentioned the location, the location of the Olympics and the Games, and we actually got a lot of comments about that. So we've received several Twitter comments just over the past couple minutes about people letting us know that they disagree with the location of the Games. There's also a comment here. I'd like to play a video comment, have all of our guests listen to this, and let us know what you think after.
Would anyone dare to hold the Olympics in Auschwitz? Well, for Circassians, Sochi is the same thing. After the genocide and subsequent exile of our people, 90% of our nation lives in diaspora. Because of the Syrian refugee crisis, our people are living in camps in Turkey today, waiting for the right to go home. But they don't have that right, and they'll be waiting indefinitely because the Russian government won't allow them in. Right across the water, there's a $50 billion party happening. This is no Sochi 2014 signing off.
So Masha, she mentions the Circassian, she mentions the location of the Olympics. Is this something that is also being discussed in Russia? I know you, of course, you just recently relocated to New York City, but before you left, is that something that you can answer?
Unfortunately, it hasn't been discussed, and I think that the fact that it hasn't been discussed, and that the whole sort of the heritage, not just the heritage, but the current situation, that whole region of Russia, which has been absolutely torn apart by ethnic tension that has been encouraged and supported by the government, that has so much become the norm in Russia, that has become so accepted that it's not even a subject of public discussion. I also want to turn to the point that Peter made about Sochi, about how Sochi is going to be such a wonderful place to be. Well, Vladimir Putin declared the equivalent of a state of emergency for the region around Sochi for 3 months surrounding the Olympics. I don't know if you've ever been to a place that has a state of emergency. It's not usually a very fun place to be.
I'll tell you, after 9/11 happening in Salt Lake City, everyone who's been to those games can understand the necessary precautions at the event of such a caliber, to provide the necessary security for this event. So
I think that if Putin feels that basically it has to be a state of emergency, then that testifies to Russia's absolute inability to, again, according to the Olympic Charter, provide adequate security measures for everybody who comes to the Olympics.
Let me broaden this conversation out, because our two Russians in this conversation can go back and forth for probably the next hour or so. So I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment and just think broader in terms of, if you do use the Olympics as a way to get out a message, to actually protest an administration, whatever you're using it for, how effective is it, Jane? Do we remember all the previous protests? It's really hard to remember them. What were the issues from the last 20 years or so? We've forgotten and moved on.
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that the people of Beijing, for example, remember very well the cost that came to many of them as a result of the Olympics. Huge. Thousands of people evicted, moved out to make way for Olympic venues and infrastructure, people who were imprisoned, who were protesting at the Olympic Games in a so-called safe protest zone, the kind of thing that we're going to see again in Sochi.
So again,
I think there are a lot of people who
impact that
actually
I'm asking
remember
about,
very well the human rights consequences of Olympics.
But the impact is a platform for protest, Jane. That was what I specifically wanted to get at.
Yeah,
Not the reason for it, but the impact.
I think.
Can I address that question?
I think there's
Let Jane have a go first, and you can go,
protest, a platform for protest, or highlighting and advocating on behalf of victims of human rights abuses. I think there are different things here. That we
who are you advocating for? I mean, like, do you have real people asking you to advocate for them?
Yes, Peter. Would you like me to introduce you to dozens of people?
Absolutely, absolutely. I would love to. I would love.
Who've been exploited, and environmental activists who have been imprisoned,
migrant
and
workers
journalists who are under house arrest.
Migrant workers who didn't have the real permission to work in this country. Yes, people who were, as you say, evicted out of their homes and given much better places to live in. Yes, I know that you can introduce me to those. Yes.
There are plenty of people who didn't get any kind of compensation whatsoever and are living in basically shacks and privileged not to be on the street. That is absolutely true, and there are facts, and there is video, and there are interviews with these people. And to hide your head in the sand and pretend that didn't happen, and it didn't happen in the name of these Olympic Games.
I'm just surprised, very surprised, because I live in this country now for almost like 4 years. By now, and I've been to Sochi, as I mentioned before, for 3 times. Walked around the city, around the Sochi, around Adler. I've met so many people who work there, who live there. I have friends living there.
So Peter, I'm going to interrupt you for a moment, because we're going back over a point that you made very clearly. Let me just bring in Masha, because Masha said she felt she could answer that idea about how effective is the Olympics, not just about Russia and Sochi, we're focused on right now, but as a platform. And do we even remember what's the impact?
Look, I don't think that the point of protest is to live on in history. The point of protest is to draw attention to a problem, and if possible to change things. Now, unfortunately, in Sochi, the International Olympic Committee is doing Putin's policing. It has gone to unprecedented lengths to warn athletes not to engage in any kind of protest, and warning them that any kind of sign that we wouldn't normally think of as protest may be interpreted as a political statement. At the same time, I think there is a very good opportunity for Western leaders, some of whom have already done so, some of whom haven't yet, to make a statement in connection with the Olympics and to protest in an effective way, which is by not going. I think that President Obama's delegation to the Olympics is terrific, not only because it includes openly gay athletes, but also because it does not include any highly placed government officials. And I hope that other Western countries that have not yet decided what their delegations are going to be also do not send them. This is not going to interfere with the actual athletic events, but it is going to interfere with Putin's dream of taking pictures with world leaders and looking like he's hosting the greatest party of his career.
Right. Malika.
Well, I want to end this by bringing it back to sports, because we asked our community to share their favorite Olympic moment, getting back to the heart of the game and the athlete's perspective. Several people wrote in, one of them, Chadley Close, beating his hero Michael Phelps in London 2012 to win gold for swimming. Another person also mentions Michael Phelps, also mentions the U.S. women's gymnastics gold in London. And one person sent in a video comment with the perspective from the athletes. Have a listen.
The Olympics is about who is better at sport, Who's faster down the mountain? Who can run the fastest? Who can swim faster? It is really not about politics, and when you start politicizing the Olympics or boycotting the Olympics, which has happened in the past, you hurt the athletes. The athletes is not who you want to hurt. If you want to talk politics, leave it to the politicians. Don't use the Olympics as a springboard for political action. That's not what it's about, and that's not what it should be about.
Well, Steve says that in a video comment. I know he's going to get a lot of people online who disagree with him, and some in our panel too. So
I think
that conversation will continue.
Absolutely. I'm just going to say thank you very much to Caitlin. Caitlin, just in response to that video comment, how would you wrap up your closing thought for us on this conversation?
Well, I think I agree with the comment in the sense that, again, athletes are trying to do their best and they're trying to compete and bring honor to themselves and maybe some gold medals. That's their role. They're not diplomats. If they want to make a statement, they should do it, but it's up to each individual athlete. I guess for me, the Olympics as a whole, I've always been inspired by them. I think that they can have the opportunity to bring out the best in humanity. There is that potential there, but there's a lot of cynicism that surrounds it, and we import a lot of that when we speak about the Olympics politically. And while I'm not naive, I do think that it would be great if we could all look at them with an open mind, maybe a hint of optimism, and try to glean something really fantastic out of this coming together. So I hope that's what happens. I hope we all have a safe, productive, and inspiring Olympic Games.
Do you have a Twitter handle, Caitlin?
Excuse me?
Do you have a Twitter handle? You have a Twitter handle? You tweet?
I do. It's at OchoKHow.
Fantastic. Will you tweet us? Will you tweet us through your Olympics to at AJ Stream? So we can get the perspective that you're sharing with your other Twitter followers with us. So tweet us directly as you're going through all the things at Sochi, so we can hear your perspective as you go through. So keep us in that conversation.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you. Masha, what's your closing thoughts for us? It's a huge conversation. It's a sort of, it happens every 4 years, every time the Olympics pops up. So what do you want to leave us with that you feel is most important?
Well, I think that there's still time to ensure that the Sochi Olympics, even though they should not be happening in Sochi, but that the Sochi Olympics have a positive impact overall. And I think one is, again, by Western leaders not going to Sochi and making a point of it. And that will also perhaps teach the IOC a lesson about not giving dictatorships the games in the future.
Peter, your last thought you want to leave us with before you head off to Sochi?
Well, I wish that this upcoming Olympics will bring everyone together and give everyone the same sense of friendship and team spirit that is in the Olympic Village during the games, that I know that athletes feel. And using the chance, I want to wish Caitlin best of luck, Team USA, and of course let all athletes have great luck, best performances of their lifetime, and let the strongest win.
Yeah, you started a whole debate now just saying good luck to Team USA. I'm going to say good luck to all of the teams competing in the Winter Olympics. So Jane, I just had a thought. We had this conversation with our entire team. It's like, where would you put the games then? If you had to avoid controversies and reasons for people to protest, is there an ideal place that you would place the games?
Look, there's no country that has an absolutely pure human rights record. You know, we, Human Rights Watch, researches all over the world, including in the United States and many Western countries. There are human rights abuses everywhere. What the IOC can do when it's looking for cities and countries to host Olympic Games is to make very clear that there are expectations for those host cities, those host countries, in terms of human rights. In the same way as there are expectations about the venues and the communications and the transportation and security, governments should be also expected to make clear and to report on and to be inspected on how they're doing in terms of human rights. Are there human rights abuses being propelled by the preparations for the Olympics or in the name of the Olympics?
Okay. Jane, Peter, Masha and Caitlin, it's been great having you in this conversation. Thank you very much for your time, and the online community as well. Did you get a sense of where they were feeling like one way or the other? Politics, no politics in the games? Thank you.
I think it's pretty still evenly split.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you so much to everybody who joined in the conversation, who's watching right now. Let me tell you about the next AJ stream. We head to Malaysia, where hundreds of Bibles have been seized because they contain the word God, or to be precise, the Arabic word for God, which is Allah. Malay courts have decided that only Muslims can use Allah, and that's created a very big debate. We'll be digging into that debate on the next AJ stream. Until then, we'll see you online at stream.aljazeera.com. Take care.